Good morning. Thank you for joining me this day. This morning we'll be in Leviticus chapter 24, verse 1 through chapter 25, verse 46. The Lord spoke to Moses, "Command the Israelites to bring to you pure oil of beaten olives for the light, to make a lamp burn continually. Outside the veil canopy of the congregation in the meeting tent, Aaron must arrange it from evening until morning before the Lord continually. This is a perpetual statute throughout your generations. On the ceremonially pure lampstand he must arrange the lamps before the Lord continually. You must take choice wheat flour and bake 12 loaves. There must be 2/10 of an ephah of flour in each loaf. And you must set them in 2 rows, 6 in a row on the ceremonially pure table before the Lord. You must put pure frankincense on each row, and it will become a memorial portion for the bread, a gift to the Lord. Each Sabbath day, Aaron must arrange it before the Lord continually. This portion is from the Israelites as a perpetual covenant. It will belong to Aaron and his sons, and they must eat it in a holy place, because it is most holy to him, a perpetually allotted portion from the gifts of the Lord." Now an Israelite woman's son, whose father was an Egyptian, went out from among the Israelites, and the Israelite woman's son and an Israelite man had a fight in the camp. The Israelite woman's son misused the name and cursed, so they brought him to Moses. Now his mother's name was Shelemeth, daughter of Dibri of the tribe of Dan. So they placed him in custody until they were able to make a clear legal decision for themselves based on words from the mouth of the Lord. Then the Lord spoke to Moses, "Bring the one who cursed outside the camp, and all who heard him are to lay their hands on his head, and the whole congregation is to stone him to death. Moreover, you are to tell the Israelites, if any man curses his God, he will bear responsibility for his sin. And one who misuses the name of the Lord must surely be put to death. The whole congregation must surely stone him, whether he is a foreigner or a native citizen. When he misuses the name, he must be put to death. If a man beats any person to death, he must be put to death. One who beats an animal to death must make restitution for it, life for life. If a man inflicts an injury on his fellow citizen, just as he has done, it must be done to him. Fracture for fracture, eye for eye, tooth for tooth. Just as he inflicts an injury on another person, that same injury must be inflicted on him. One who beats an animal to death must make restitution for it, but one who beats a person to death must be put to death. There will be one regulation for you, whether a foreigner or a native citizen, for I am the Lord your God." Then Moses spoke to the Israelites, and they brought the one who cursed outside the camp and stoned him with stones. So the Israelites did just as the Lord had commanded Moses. The Lord spoke to Moses at Mount Sinai. "Speak to the Israelites and tell them, when you enter the land that I am giving you, the land must observe a Sabbath to the Lord. 6 years you must sow your field, and 6 years you may prune your vineyard and gather the produce. But in the 7th year, the land must have a Sabbath of complete rest, a Sabbath to the Lord. You must not sow your field or prune your vineyard. You must not gather in the aftergrowth of your harvest, and you must not pick the grapes of your unpruned vines. The land must have a year of complete rest. You may have the Sabbath produce of the land to eat. You, your male servant, your female servant, your hired worker, the resident foreigner who stays with you, your cattle and the wild animals that are in your land, all its produce will be for you to eat. You must count off 7 weeks of years, 7 times 7 years, and the days of the 7 weeks of years will amount to 49 years. You must sound loud horn blasts in the 7th month, on the 10th day of the month, on the Day of Atonement. You must sound the horn in your entire land. So you must consecrate the 50th year, and you must proclaim a release in the land for all its inhabitants. The year will be your jubilee, each one of you." Okay. Sorry for the technical difficulties. We'll go with this, see how that works. if YouTube ever gets back here. Oh, there we go. Or maybe the display is just broken. I'm going to go with the assumption that the display is broken and keep going here. Continuing on in Leviticus chapter 25, verse 12. Because that year is a jubilee to you, you may eat its produce from the field. In this year of jubilee, you must each return to your property. If you make a sale to your fellow citizen or buy from your fellow citizen, no one is to wrong his brother. You may buy it from your fellow citizen according to the number of years since the last jubilee. He may sell it to you according to the years of produce that are left. The more years there are, the more you may make its purchase price, and the fewer years there are, the less you must make its purchase price, because he is only selling to you a number of years of produce. No one is to oppress his fellow citizen, but you must fear your God, because I am the Lord your God. You must obey my statutes and my regulations. You must be sure to keep them, so that you may live securely in the land. The land will give its fruit, and you may eat until you are satisfied, and you may live securely in the land. If you say, "What will we eat in the 7th year if we do not sow and gather our produce?" I will command my blessing for you in the 6th year, so that it may yield the produce for 3 years, and you may sow the 8th year and eat from that 6th year's produce, old produce, until you bring in the 9th year's produce. You may eat old produce. The land must not be sold without reclaim, because the land belongs to me, for you are foreigners and residents with me. In all your landed property you must provide for the right of redemption of the land. If your brother becomes impoverished and sells some of his property, his near redeemer is to come to you and redeem what his brother sold. If a man has no redeemer, but he prospers and gains enough for its redemption, he is to calculate the value of the years it was sold, refund the balance to the man to whom he had sold it, and return to his property. If he has not prospered enough to refund a balance to him, then what he sold will belong to the one who bought it until the Jubilee year. But it must revert in the Jubilee, and the original owner may return to his property. If a man sells a residential house in a walled city, its right of redemption must extend until 1 full year from its sale. Its right of redemption must extend a full calendar year. If it is not redeemed before the full calendar year is ended, the house in the walled city will belong without reclaim to the one who bought it throughout his generations. It will not revert in the Jubilee. The houses of villages, however, which have no wall surrounding them, must be considered as the field of the land. They will have the right of redemption and must revert in the Jubilee. As for the cities of the Levites, the houses in the cities which they possess, the Levites must have a perpetual right of redemption. Whatever someone among the Levites might redeem, the sale of a house which is his property in a city, must revert in the Jubilee, because the houses of the cities of the Levites are their property in the midst of the Israelites. Moreover, the open field areas of their cities must not be sold, because that is their perpetual possession. If your brother becomes impoverished and is indebted to you, you must support him. He must live with you like a foreign resident. Do not take interest or profit from him, but you must fear your God, and your brother must live with you. You must not lend him your money at interest, and you must not sell him food for profit. I am the Lord your God, who brought you out from the land of Egypt to give you the land of Canaan, to be your God. If your brother becomes impoverished with regard to you, so that he sells himself to you, you must not subject him to slave service. He must be with you as a hired worker, as a resident foreigner. He must serve with you until the year of Jubilee. But then he may go free, he and his children with him, and may return to his family and to the property of his ancestors. Since they are my servants, whom I brought out from the land of Egypt, they must not be sold in a slave sale. You must not rule over him harshly, but you must fear your God. As for your male and female slaves who may belong to you, you may buy male and female slaves from the nations all around you. Also, you may buy slaves from the children of the foreigners who reside with you, and from their families that are with you, whom they have fathered in your land. They may become your property. You may give them as inheritance to your children after you to possess as property. You may enslave them perpetually. However, as for your brothers, the Israelites, no man may rule over his brother harshly. Huh. So, quite a bit there. You have it's starting out with the lamp and the bread of the sanctuary. And the commands concerning how much bread's supposed to be there, how much flour is supposed to be used in that bread, and the frankincense that goes on it, and then how it's supposed to be arranged. And then you have this one who had cursed the name of the Lord, or had misused the name of God and cursed. And it was such a serious offense that those who had heard him, along with the entire congregation of Israel, were to put him to death, which should tell us something about being flippant with the use of the name of the Lord. Namely, we shouldn't be. And then it says, essentially, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth here. I'm putting limits on what can be done to a person. And then you had, in Leviticus 25, the year of Jubilee and the law of redemption concerning property, and for poor men and slaves. Let's see, what's Guzik got to say? The pure gold lampstand became one of the enduring images representing Israel and the Jewish people. The lampstand in the temple in the time of Jesus was captured by Roman soldiers under the command of Titus when Jerusalem was destroyed in AD 70. An image of that lampstand was carved in the arch in the city of Rome, made to celebrate that victory. The image of the lampstand is also found in other ancient carvings and coins. From evening until morning before the Lord continually. It was important that the light from the oil lamps shined continually. God did not want his tabernacle to be left in darkness. You shall take fine flour and bake 12 cakes with it. The 12 cakes of bread were arranged in an orderly way on the table of showbread. They were equally divided into 2 rows, representing the 12 tribes of Israel in the presence of the Lord in his tabernacle. This bread is called the showbread in Exodus 25:30, which literally means bread of the face. This was bread associated with the presence of God. Eating bread together was a mark of friendship and fellowship. The 12 cakes of bread spoke of the relationship and fellowship the people of God had with their God. And I guess this was bread that didn't have any leaven in it. So, interesting. Set in order before the Lord continually. The 2 aspects of this were a symbol of God's desired relationship with his people. God wants a proper, ordered relationship with his people. God also wants a continual, unbroken relationship with his people. I wonder if it also points to kind of symbology of the flesh. That is, when you have the Passover being eaten by Jesus, he says, this is my body. And of the wine, he says, this is my blood, type thing. So, yeah, not sure. Now the son of an Israelite woman, whose father was an Egyptian, went out among the children of Israel. This man, half Egyptian, and half Hebrew, was part of the mixed multitude that went with Israel out of Egypt. Here also we have a fragment of history. It may be that it was inserted here because of its occurrence during the period of the promulgation of the laws. Adam Clarke wrote of Jewish legends regarding this man. The rabbis, it is true, supply in their way this deficiency. They say he was the son of the Egyptian whom Moses slew, and that attempting to pitch his tent among those of the tribe of Dan, to which he belonged by his mother's side, he was prevented by a person of that tribe as having no right to a station among them, who were true Israelites both by father and mother. In consequence of this, they say he blasphemed the name of the Lord. The man committed the crime of blasphemy, which is to attack someone, especially God, with your words. It is somewhat like the modern idea of verbal abuse, but especially directed against God. The command against blasphemy. Stream just keeps going out this morning. Then let all who heard him lay their hands on him. This was done in accord with a principle later specifically stated in Deuteronomy 17, 6-7. 2 or 3 of the witnesses publicly laid hands on the accused as a sure testimony to his guilt. This also meant that the guilty man knew his accusers and could not be condemned by secret accusers. And let all the congregation stone him. God commanded execution by stoning for several reasons. First, stones were plentiful. More importantly, it was so that the community could participate in the execution. This was both a strong warning and a way of saying, this man has not only sinned against God, he has also sinned against the community. Therefore, the law applied to a foreigner. It was a principle of justice and of mercy. Its first emphasis is upon the fact that those who enter the kingdom of God and enjoy its privileges must be governed by its laws. To enter the kingdom is to renounce all other lordships and to accept its laws. Adam Clarke on blasphemy in Matthew 9:3. Whenever it is used in reference to God, it simply signifies to speak impiously of his nature, or attributes, or works. Injurious speaking is its proper translation when referred to man. Taking great care to not blaspheme the name of the Lord, some Jewish people created traditions that took great care to avoid saying or writing the name of God. The thought was that if one never said or wrote the name of God, then one could never blaspheme God's name. By some accounts, only the Jewish high priest was allowed to pronounce the holy name of God, Yahweh. He was allowed to say it only once a year, on the Day of Atonement. Some say that the proper pronunciation of the name would be passed on from the high priest to his successor with the former's last breath. This is why there was confusion for many years about the exact pronunciation of the 4 letters that state the name of the covenant God of Israel. The letters have been pronounced differently over the years. For some time, the letters Yahweh were YHWH were mistakenly pronounced as Yehovah instead of Yahweh. Adam Clarke wrote in his day, the Jews never pronounced this name, and so long has it been disused among them that the true pronunciation is now totally lost. Many religiously observant Jewish people also would not write the name of God, because if that paper were destroyed, it might be considered blasphemy or taking the name of the Lord in vain. So they would write Adonai, that is Lord, instead of Yahweh, instead of God. They would write G-D. They would refer to God with names like the name instead of saying God. They took outside the camp the one who had cursed and stoned him with stones. This verse is important. It demonstrates to us that the law of God was not given to Israel for interesting facts or mere guidelines. God expected them to obey it. Here, they obeyed even when it was difficult. The Jews themselves tell us that their manner of stoning was this. They brought the condemned person without the camp, because his crimes had rendered him unclean, and whatever was unclean must be put without the camp. When they came within 4 cubits of the place of execution, they stripped the criminal, if a man leaving him nothing but a cloth about the waist. The place on which he was to be executed was elevated, and the witnesses went up with him to it, and laid their hands upon him, for the purposes mentioned in verse 14. Then one of the witnesses struck him with a stone upon the loins. If he was not killed with that blow, then the witnesses took up a great stone, as much as 2 men could lift, and threw it upon his breast. This was the coup de grace, and finished the tragedy. From Clark. Then the law of Jubilee, which essentially every 50 years, no matter how you bought the land or came about owning it, the land would revert to the original owner. And it was supposed to be a year of celebration, and also the freeing of slaves as well. The traditional rendering of the name for this special year is Jubilee, which is ultimately a transliteration of a Hebrew word meaning ram's horn. 2 fallow years in succession would have been a severe test of faith. The Israelites were called upon to trust totally in God and acknowledge in a profound way that He was the provider of the basic necessities of life. Proclaim liberty throughout all the land to all its inhabitants. The wonderful liberty of a jubilee was joyfully announced throughout all the land, announcing that all slaves were free. We don't have much of a record of this being observed in the Old Testament. There may be examples in Nehemiah 8 and 10, though I think they later recalled their slaves. So, no, not in Nehemiah. Maybe. Difficult to remember now. I know they did recall their slaves in one instance, though. When the trumpet sounded on the Day of Atonement to proclaim a jubilee, it meant more than the land receiving an extra year of rest. It was also a liberation of sorts, which the following verses will explain. Land was to return to the family it was originally given to, and people, including slaves, were expected to return home. When Israel came into the Promised Land, the land was allotted according to tribes and families. These initial tracts of land would be the permanent possession of those families, and therefore land in Israel could never be permanently sold. It could only be leased, and the amount of the lease would be based on the number of years which were left until the Jubilee. Therefore you shall not oppress one another. Though this was extremely charitable and helpful to the families in Israel, this was not a socialist system, because only land was redistributed. Most effectively, this helped protect against the existence of a permanent underclass in Israel. We don't know for a fact that the year of Jubilee was ever actually observed. Jeremiah 34, 8-15 describes an attempt to implement some of the principles of the Jubilee. Yet to whatever degree it was observed, this system was a blessing to Israel in the ancient world. It meant no clan or large family unit was forever poor. Every 50 years there was a reset in the economy of Israel, with debts canceled, servants liberated, and the return of land. However, this worked for a society based on agriculture, and agriculture on the scale possible in pre-modern times. It also worked for a society that did not have dramatic population growth over the centuries. Today, some of the principles of the year of Jubilee would be a blessing for modern society, such as a system of the cancellation of debts every 50 years. However, since God did not assign land for modern people across the globe, as He did for Israel in Joshua 13:21, we can't take every principle of a Jubilee and apply it to the modern world. For the land is mine. The whole earth is the Lord's, yet God has a special regard for the land of Israel, which He calls His holy land. Here God proclaimed that the land of Israel is his in a special way beyond the sense in which all the earth belongs to him. Yeah, and then a bit about the kinsman redeemer here. Care of the poor. If one of your brethren becomes poor, these commands specifically prohibited making money from the misfortune of a poor brother. Instead of making profit from the misery of a poor brother, the command was simple: you shall help him. Take no usury or interest from him, but fear your God, that your brother may live with you. Jesus made a similar command in Luke 6:34 when he asked what credit could it be to us if we give to or help only those whom we know can help us back. In medieval Europe, Christians often refused to loan money at interest because of these biblical laws against usury. Motivated by hatred of the Jews, Christians often punished Jewish people into occupations that were thought of as low and inferior, collecting taxes and rent, and money lending. Christians thought of these occupations as necessary evils and thought to make the Jews bear the evil of the necessities. Yet because of this, Jewish people in medieval Europe dominated many aspects of banking and financial business, which often made them more envied and resented by the Christians of Europe. I think misapplied scripture can cause problems. You shall not compel him to serve as a slave. It was normal in the ancient world for someone in life-threatening poverty or unable to pay their debts to become a slave. The law of Moses would not allow an Israelite to do this for one of his brethren. He was not to be regarded as a slave, but as a hired servant and a sojourner. Though it is almost impossible for us to relate in the modern world, this kind of slavery was necessary and helpful in the ancient world. For most of humanity's history, the poorest people were sometimes confronted with a choice between death by starvation or becoming a slave. In such circumstances, it is hard to call slavery good, but it was certainly preferred to the alternative. He shall serve you until the year of Jubilee. The Israelite brother, who was regarded as a hired servant and a sojourner, could be released from his obligation when his debt was paid. But every hired servant and sojourner was released at the year of Jubilee. For they are my servants. The Hebrew word used here is actually slave, as in verse 39, and should be so translated, so that the connection between this statement and the previous verses may be clear. The people of Israel had been slaves of the Egyptians, but when they were delivered, they became the property of the one who redeemed them, the Lord himself. Yeah. And as master over his slaves, he has the right to exercise rule and governing authority over them. And in this case, it's don't mistreat your own slaves. And as for your male and female slaves whom you may have from the nations that are around you, from them you may buy and male and female slaves. Foreign slaves from debt or poverty did not have the same rights as Israelites, who went into servitude because of debt. They could be held as slaves for life, assuming their debt or obligation was never paid, though they had to be treated humanely. Exodus 21:16 specifically says that kidnapping a man to sell him was a sin and not allowed in Israel. Later, the prophet Amos rebuked Tyre for their traffic in slaves as a violation of the covenant of brotherhood. This is a subtle yet important difference between slavery as it was and is commonly practiced and slavery as regulated in the Bible. Most slavery, ancient and modern, was actually a form of kidnapping, the taking and imprisoning of a person against their will. As regulated in the Bible and as practiced in some other ancient cultures, slavery was received willingly, usually as payment for debt, or in the case of war, was an alternative to death. In ancient Israel, people from other cultures were not kidnapped and enslaved, as was the practice in the African slave trade. Yeah. And in fact, the one who kidnaps a man was to be put to death. Anywho, thank you so much for joining me today. Hope you have a great day.